Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. Today I have Peter Ballerstedt. This guy, if you want to know about cows, you want to know about regenerative agriculture, all that kind of stuff, he's the guy. But he's also a great person, and we got to know each other a little bit through some of the low-carb meetings and all that. So Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be here for this conversation, which I suspect is going to be a little different than most conversations that I end up having on Zoom.
Yeah, me too. I think it's one of those things. I think low carb MD, we focus a lot on the diet, exercise, talking about beef and obviously you talking about grass-fed beef and how, a lot of us are very, we want to do the right thing. We want animals to be treated appropriately. And when you came in with your data, I was actually stunned by a lot of this stuff. So tell us about that side of it a little bit, professionally, what you're learning as far as being responsible human beings with our planet. And then we can get into your more personal stuff.
Sure. Well, I guess the secret to enlightenment is to lighten up. So people get really, really concerned about buying exactly the right kind of this, that, or the other thing, and we're driven by label claims. And I want people to understand that what they're looking for is already available to them in whatever markets they have access to without having to spend any more. Don't need to incur the financial stress of paying more for something. That many times these arguments that got us to believe that low fat is heart healthy also then came back to influence people's perception about grass-fed beef, for example. This is, as I think Nina Teicholz did a really good job of indicating, there was always an industry that benefited from these stories. And first it was olive oil and the Mediterranean diet. And then it was, the dark chocolate from Switzerland, right? And then there was the fish oil. And that fish oil then informed people that wanted to advocate on a nutritional basis for grass-finished beef versus other forms. And today, a lot of people think that in order to have a positive sort of agricultural image, it must be one form of management practice. And I want to introduce people to a number of managers who are doing things appropriate to their operations. They're what I call results driven, not process driven. So if we know the results we're trying to drive toward, then I think people should have the freedom to choose the appropriate process to get there. And when we get away from that kind of approach, then we get into top-down management and one size fits all management. And we've seen how that can just lead us tremendously wrong. So there have been producers who for generations have been striving to accomplish what today gets marketed under regenerative agriculture. Well, we didn't have it then, but they've been doing it for generations. So part of the unfortunate part of that is people think that unless they hear that title, the rancher isn't driving toward those results. And so I want people to kind of understand that there have been a lot of people working in this space for a lot of years.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, it becomes an ethical thing. They see these images, propaganda images of animals being tortured and beaten. I'll tell you, it's kind of funny. This weekend, my wife and I were out in the country and we stayed in a little cottage somewhere on a farm. And I was watching the farmer. He would go up, pet the cows. They loved him. They would follow him around. I was like, wow, this is kind of, it was kind of cool to see. Like he would play with them, like scare them, like, like move real quick, and they would look at him like, oh, it's okay. But they had a relationship. And I was like, wow, that is kind of like, people don't realize how much, and I remember you telling a story about that, a farmer that didn't want to go in the hospital because he had to take care of his animals. Maybe you could tell that story too for people.
Well, yeah, this is John, our colleague from Montana, gave me this story that he got a call from the emergency department. Um, One of his patients apparently had experienced a heart attack and was refusing to be admitted, and they wanted John to come and talk sense to him. And he arrived, and what the rancher said is, look, I'll sign whatever you want me to sign, right? It won't be your fault. I'll come back tomorrow. You can schedule whatever. I'll go through whatever tomorrow. But I've I have to make arrangements for people to take care of the cows tomorrow, and they have to be taken care of tonight. And I haven't made those arrangements for tonight. I will for tomorrow, right? But cows come first. These animals depend on me. And that's a reality for any responsible person within animal agriculture. All right. That's the role that they assume. And it's easy to kind of minimize that, or maybe even look completely past it if you've never had that experience. But when people, one of the differences, if you're running a cow-calf operation, you've got animals 365 days, right? You have to take care of them. And in many parts of this country, that can occur under conditions where you're putting your life at risk to go out and do it. That's a reality. And I don't think people recognize that enough. And of course, in addition to doing that, they're doing many other things that benefit society, right? There's lots of things that we could talk about there. Um, I just, you mentioned ethics, and I'm also nervous about using ethical in this conversation space, because very few human beings would describe themselves as unethical. I mean, most people like to entertain the idea that that I'm ethical. Let's just keep it that way. And yet we know human nature, right? We know if you push hard enough, we can find some darkness in there. But to say that what I advocate is ethical has an implied contra, right? That is, anyone who disagrees with me is not. Well, I'm tired. I'm very tired of us and them. I'm tired of the diet wars. I have no patience for any of that anymore. I am concerned about human lives, first and foremost. And I'm concerned that there are people who are living lives that are less than they could be, because for too long we've had people who were too eager to advocate for their position without good data. But they always couched it as, this is best for your health, and this is best for the planet, and this is best for the animals, and whatever. Okay, we need to get past that. In God we trust, all others must bring data. So where's your data? And in too many of these conversations, it's about feelings, it's about beliefs, and I'm fine with that, except when you want to make broad, overreaching statements about how other people should live and eat, and right.
Yeah, I think that's in my realm. That's what I see a lot, is everyone's worried about everyone else and not really worried about religion's the same way. Everyone's like, oh, he shouldn't be that religion. That's a crazy thing. And like, tell me I shouldn't believe what I believe. And also dietary wise, people say, well, that's crazy. Well, the guy lost 300 pounds and his life's better and everything's good. Leave him alone. So it's funny. And then you have purists in any form. I mean, that's one thing I've learned, like, kind of like what you're saying, these diet wars. Like, okay, if he's vegan and he's happy, cool. Let him be vegan and be happy. If he's miserable every day, you go, let's look for for another alternative. That's what we do in medicine and in life. So I think that is so true. And so many people are, it's not only diet too, it's lifestyle, being stressed and tense and worried and angry and bitter and all this stuff. And that's a big reason why I did this podcast. And you're a guy who comes along peaceful. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is the area you're in, talking about, farming and cattle and stuff. I'm thinking when I first heard you speak, I thought this guy's pretty courageous, because there's a lot of people who have vested interest in you not getting your message out.
Perhaps I know enough to know that there are people who certainly promote a different message. I think that the reality is the vast majority of people in the population today are not on the tails of that bell curve, right? They're worried about how to make ends meet. They're worried about putting food on the table. They're worried about the food that they put on the table, et cetera, et cetera. Are their children going to grow up and be happy? I mean, those sorts of things. Hopefully what I can do is build bridges between the silos of expertise that I've gotten to know. I know people who reside within those silos. What I've observed is there's a lack of connection. There needs to be bridges between those silos. The knowledge gets a mile deep and a couple feet wide, or I just messed up that. But that idea that as we get more and more advanced in our training, the area gets narrower and narrower. And so then you end up with widely separated things. But we live in an age when people don't always operate on those same rules. So the best example that I can give is if you go back to the mid to late 70s, and it's fascinating to read some of the reports that were coming out, because you had people who were trying to push back against what was ultimately going to become the dietary goals for America and then the dietary guidelines. And you had people who were acting as they had been trained to act as scientists and not reach firm conclusions, but speak about what they're seeing as possibilities, the data, well, they were up against people that didn't operate under those rules. And so then you had people who were very happy to make very firm statements and very firm conclusions, without evidence to support them. In fact, in the face of contradictory evidence. But then you had people who were talking against them as scientists, saying, well, we really don't have that kind of firm evidence. And in fact, we have evidence that suggests maybe harm could come. And out of all that, you had people who were willing to say, we see no evidence of potential of harm. It could only benefit. Well, in the fullness of time, we see that maybe not so much. Would you like to rethink that, Dr. Hegstead? Just to name one. So now we live in this age where the information is even more widely disseminated. And how can we just get information in front of people so that they now are aware of it and say, wait a minute, you mean that red meat doesn't cause cancer? You mean that saturated fat doesn't cause heart disease? You mean that, eating animal source foods doesn't lead to Alzheimer's? I mean, all these things have been said, but there's no truth there. And meanwhile, we have people who are working under tremendous stress, financial, physical, emotional. And as a result of that work, they're providing the best quality food that's ever been available to humanity in the greatest amount at the lowest relative cost ever. And we have people who, one, got us into the mess that we are with our dietary thought. And they're saying that those people, the farmers and ranchers, they're the ones that are the problem. If you just do what we're saying harder, right? So at a certain point, it transcends, and I get very close to being angry, and that's not helpful. I, I need to take, sort of the first time I read Good Calories, Bad Calories, that was my reaction. I got mad. And then, so, okay, we need to find another more constructive approach to this. And so that's kind of what animates me. And I don't think I'm that important. I don't have one thing is I'm not selling anything, even a book. I'm not, I have no patrons giving me money. It's like, this is just information that I've come up. I'm trying to pay it forward. People trained me. I've gotten to work with some of the best people. It's been my pleasure to know. I've now met this incredible community of physicians and clinicians who themselves are exhibiting a bit of courage, understanding the reality that they're operating in. The least I can do is say, have you heard of this guy, Lenskis? He seems to be doing something you might want to pay attention to. So I'd like to be a good pipe. I just want to build bridges. I don't want to attack anyone. I just want to put the information out there to the best of my ability.
Yeah, I think we're the same cloth that way. I think it's important to realize, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's the success I'm having. I'm not going to criticize other people because people will say, well, the vegans are doing this, and some people are decreasing the risk of heart attacks and stroke. Yeah, we all agree if we cut out processed foods, that, all the processed garbage in the middle, that we do better. And then you fall over to whatever spectrum you want to fall into. And I think people get into such battles thinking their way is the only way, the only truth, and that makes things a little challenging. So you come along as a voice of reason, say, well, here's the options. Here's what you had some information on the nutritional value of red meat. And I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, that's a huge multivitamin, and then you have some people on the other side saying, well, one egg's like smoking a pack of cigarettes or something. It's like, well, where do you get that from? It's totally made up. So we have a responsibility to present the data as we see it, whether I like it or not, and I think from all perspectives, we have to do that.
Yeah. I also think, and we may have spoken about this. It seems to me like anybody who's actually in the disciplines that inform any of this conversation, they're aware of the limitations. They're aware of the shortfalls in their methodology, in the research, whatever. When the results of that then get translated to the public, all of that nuance doesn't travel with it. And so then you can find people who, they're looking at a relative risk of 1.2 and saying, oh my God, look at that, that's terrible. And it's like, no, it isn't. But, and again, then you have people who, they're trying to get tenure, they're trying to get funding, they're trying to all these things. And so they give a slant to their results that goes into the media. You have, publicity departments at these institutions, and so they pump it up to get lots of clicks and likes and whatever the jargon is these days. And so the next thing you know is you have, idiotic statements like, eating an egg a day is the equivalent of smoking. And I was like, no, just stop. That's ludicrous, and you're not helping the cause that you're promoting by doing that. And I could point to some other examples. So, yeah, could we just introduce people to the information that's available? I mean, in the age of today, we have access to information that you used to have to go to the library to get, right? The gatekeepers are still standing their posts, but the walls have been breached on either side of them.
Yeah,
So they're just this anachronistic, construct that I'm going to somehow, it's like, no, people who can read, people who can understand can access this information and see for themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we educate ourselves and we take responsibility and say, well, let me look at both sides. I think that is the thing that's bothering me. And that's the reason I did this podcast. One of the big reasons was I saw that people lost the ability to have a discussion about something and say, well, you believe this, Peter, here's what I believe. Why do you believe what you believe? Let me tell you why I believe what I believe. And listen to each other, not a debate where you're just trying to prove your point. No matter what, you die on your, then next week you argue the other side. This is not an intellectual argument. So I think there's a lot of, I've experienced that where people just want to attack and they don't want to listen and say, well, here's why I'm saying this. Here's my results clinically. And it's for you to have, I've seen that you're the same type of person. Say, well, let's discuss it reasonably and, not have a shouting match and see who could yell the loudest, but here's my data, show me yours, and we can talk about it. Maybe we meet in the middle. Maybe I change down the road. Right.
Well, yeah, I to that point, the data. Okay, we can have lots of data about total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol and BMI, right? But at the end of the day, are those meaningful metrics? And we can measure exquisitely small differences in nutritional composition of various products. What's the biological significance of those differences? And against all that background, you've got genetic diversity in the individuals, you've got everything else in their lives. I think Adele Height talks about the pink bow tie effect, right? Or it's her explanation
Mm-hmm.
of the healthy adherer bias, right? If you have a group of people, but one subgroup of that is more concerned about their health than someone else, than another group, they're going to be different in a lot of ways, not just what you are looking at in this particular case. And so one of the inherent weaknesses in nutritional epidemiology of chronic disease is there's lots of variables that aren't measured. And at the end of the day, people say, well, this is one. Well, to bring it back more toward the subject, um, if you have a group of people who are part of a community of faith and they practice that faith on a daily basis, the statistics have shown that those people are of better health than people who don't. Okay, for some reason that never makes the headlines. It's always, if you eat an egg, it's equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes. Yeah, can't imagine why people would not go to one when they're eager to go to the other. That's sarcasm on my part.
Yeah, but I think
Um,
I think that's true. When you say, well, okay, look, let's look. If one person exercises every day, what you're getting at is a lot of these studies are epidemiological studies, and so what they are looking at is they go, okay, in the last 5 years, how many times did you drink orange juice? How many times did you have toast? How many? So the argument is generally people who eat more red meat are the people who said, forget it, I'm not listening to what my doctor's saying. Anyways, I mean red meat, but they're also eating French fries and Coke, drinking Coke, and smoking more and drinking more, and not exercising. So it's not apples to apples that we're comparing. So when you start taking out the healthy user bias, a lot of this data falls by the wayside, and it doesn't really stand up the way they try to make it sound like it does.
yeah, the best example that I can give is you have Loma Linda releases a study showing that members of their community, are longer lived than people who don't follow their dietary advice. Well, except when you look at similar socioeconomic groups of Mormons or members of the Church of Latter-day Saints. And there's a significant difference between those two communities. And that is the latter have no restriction on eating animal source food, while the former does. They both advocate against smoking. They both advocate against drinking. And that even extends to, caffeine in any form. So that would cut back a lot of Coca-Cola and other products. And, they belong to communities of faith and they tend to have, family, they're reasonably stable. So that lowers those kinds of stresses. When you look at both of them, they're similar. Oh, okay. So it's not necessarily the meat eating in those cases, but, So in any case, yeah.
Yeah,
And
lifestyle. I mean, that's what we're all talking about. Lifestyle plays a huge role. So you could eat a perfect diet and be miserable and hate everyone. And that's the other part of this podcast. We have to look on my other podcast, Low Carb MD. We're talking about diet, lifestyle. So we talk about this stuff too. But it's really important for people to understand faith and to transition a little bit. What do
mhm,
you do? How do you get through the hard times? How do you like these times? This year was a challenging year for a lot of people.
mhm.
So how do
Yeah.
you, as a scientist, as a doing what
I
you
guess,
do.
yeah, yeah. So the
What
first
keeps
thing,
you grounded?
well, um, it's this wire that I have that goes down to a stake in the ground. No, I, the first thing I want to say is, if you believe that there's a conflict between a life in science and a life of faith, then I want to respectfully suggest that that's a result of a misunderstanding of either or both. And it may have been given to you, right? But it doesn't inherently exist in either space. And one place that I've come into contact with is called biologos. And the gentleman who headed the Human Genome Project is a professing Christian, but a high level scientist. And so for people who struggle with that, I mean, I've heard from a lot of people who say, I can't talk about my faith at work and I can't talk about my work in my, you know,
Mhm.
church. And I just think that ultimately science is about learning more about creation and therefore about the creator. And it always has been. I mean, going way back to the giants in science. Now, to be sure, the church is frequently messed up along the way because they keep letting humans into it, and that's a good way to mess that up. So what keeps me grounded? Well, part of my experience involves alcoholism, and I've been granted a sober life for almost 3 decades now. Um, there are certain things I just don't do anymore. Period. Full stop. And some of us may relate to the diet realm. We may just have to develop that kind of clarity in our own lives that I'm not going to eat that anymore. And for a lot of people who have just talked about the amazing reversal of longstanding chronic illnesses when they eliminate certain things from their diet, and now no longer do they have that. Well, okay. So if you make the decision that I'm going to eat that again and you have that response, well, then, okay, maybe that helps in that case. For others of us that maybe aren't that severely affected, it might be a bigger um, challenge. In terms of grounding, I have to be in contact with people who share that experience. It's been a challenge this year, but when I'm not in contact with them, um, yeah, then my outlook can deteriorate. Let's put it that way. When I first started this journey of sobriety, which goes back to 91, um, I was an arrogant individual. I was someone who there were lots of issues beyond the overt. But one of the things was, God is dog spelled backwards and man created God in his own image and yada, 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 all that sort of stuff. Um, Over time, I got introduced to God who loved me enough to intervene in my life through other people primarily. I've been so self-absorbed that if he were to, set a bush on fire next to me, it would be 2 days before I'd notice. I just that wouldn't have done it. It took some people stepping forward and doing those kinds of things. So as a result of that experience, and then seeing things unfold in other people's lives, good and bad, right? You do what you can, but you realize I'm only human, and that there are some things in this existence that only a power outside of human power can affect. Somebody put it this way. They said, science is the study of the reproducible, history is the study of the irreproducible. Okay. And
Yeah.
so I've gotten to see lots of people's histories unfold. It's always better when I see them, turn 180 and all of a sudden, their life is transformed. You see that in your practice in a different sort of way. Um, so I am under no illusions that a keto diet and drinking is a viable option for my life, right?
Mhm.
That the right diet won't address these issues that can so heavily weigh people down. Um, it it won't hurt, but it's not a panacea for those things. So you asked, how do I stay grounded? There's a few authors that I read. Um, yeah, I read more than just forage books and human nutrition. NT, the initials NT, right with a W, is one theologian and author that has helped me better understand the tradition that I function in as a Christian. Um, and maybe it's my mindset, but and just the way I'm wired, but he's a first century historian, and so that kind of background, what else was going on at the time, what so when somebody says something this way, they're talking to an audience about a reality. Now, yeah, they're talking to me too. I get that, but in that moment, at that time, in that culture, they were speaking, and it helps me feel better about where I am and what I'm going through when I realize what they were going through. And yeah, it looks really bad for me, but I'm still the upper part of the top 1% of humanity today, right? Regardless. And so we've spoken before about your experience overseas in medical work. I'm just learning about what it looks like to be a human being in almost half of humanity with virtually no access to electricity. I said that before, and all of the stuff that we take for granted because we can just walk in a room and turn on a light switch, right? I don't know have if you've been affected by the blackouts in California recently, but it's remarkable to me whenever I've gone through one of those inconveniences of a couple hours of no electricity. I walk into a room, I know that the power's off, but my right hand still goes for the switch, right?
Yeah, I've experienced that same thing. It's just habit. You could think it's going to turn on. What happened? There's no electricity. What? But in the third world, like it's amazing. I just had an experience last year with that where this church had one little light bulb lighting this whole church, and we went in there with the team and we just lit it up, right? And they were blown away, like, wow, it's so mind blowing to have, you know, they just don't have access, right? They just don't have access to these nice LED lights and all this kind of stuff. So that's one thing is appreciation and
Gratitude.
teaching stuff. And I think we don't gratitude is a huge deal, and that's come up a lot on this podcast. Having gratitude. A lot of people just have missed out. It's a expectation. Well, I don't know the word is entitlement. I
Mm,
would say.
mm.
Well,
Yeah,
we
and
expect it, and if we're inconvenienced, we don't like it at all. But you realize all over the world, people are inconvenienced and struggle.
well, and I don't mean to minimize what anybody else is going through. Far be it from me. Um, but well, I've been told that "but" means BS to everything you just said, so there you go. Um, I I really don't mean to minimize, and it's one of those practices of I'm responsible for the words that I say, and so I want to choose them wisely. Um, Somebody said, keep your words tender because you might have to eat them. Um,
That's true. Mhm.
so how do we, and yet we really do live in a moment where we could make this amazing improvement in our own health, in the health of others. We could affect change throughout the world. And not through some of the grandiose plans that some people want to instill from the top down. I mean, there's lots of people doing good on the ground work. And at one presentation, I don't know what triggered me. Sometimes God has you say things you kind of wish he wouldn't. But standing up in front of the audience, I said something and I expected some affirmative response and I didn't get it. And I was just like, really? Okay. We had heard from Eat Better South Africa, right?
Mhm.
That effort. And so I said, well, try this for an exercise. Go to your local supermarket and figure out the price of whatever you would buy at, some upscale, high label claim store. I don't want to use brands. Figure out the difference between those items. Buy from your local supermarket for a year and save the difference. And at the end of the year, cut a check to Eat Better South Africa. And you will make a far greater impact in this world than by buying the high label claim. As I remember, the room was kind of quiet. um, it's like, ooh, okay. But we can do that here. We don't have to pay half of our disposable income to get food. And then, as one interview recently said, wonder when you're buying it, if I buy this brand or that brand or that brand of the same thing, which one's going to make me sick? And they were talking about China. So the things that we have available to us could enable us to do things to benefit brothers and sisters at home. It doesn't have, there's lots of work to be done here. Um, and then on, I've got stuff up on my bulletin board, so forgive me for reading it, but there's one that says there's an old Christian tradition that God sends each person into this world with a special message to deliver, with a special song to sing for others, with a special act of love to bestow. No one else can speak my message or sing my song or offer my act of love. These are entrusted only to me. Good
Yeah.
luck with yours. And I mean that sincerely. And you remember Chariots of Fire?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Eric Liddell, I think, was the name of the one. He went on to be a missionary and he died in captivity or shortly after liberation in World War II by the Japanese, as I recall. There's a scene where his sister is, you're wasting your life. You're going to be a missionary, whatever, whatever. And Eric says, yes, I know I'm going to be a missionary. God has called me for that. But God also made me very fast. And when I run, I feel God's pleasure. There's enough of an addict still left in me to say, God's pleasure, feeling that sounds pretty good, right? I think I'd like me some of that. And feeling it, I want more of that. If a little bit's good, a lot more must be better. That's the problem. But in this case, I don't see a downside. Unless I just go completely off the rails and forget that I am in the end, a human being with all the weaknesses and all the, problems.
Yeah, I
Hang
think
the
that's
sign.
yeah, that's an important message, right? That's an important message. Your message of 30 years of sobriety, I didn't even know that before we'd really talked. Um, and so, you know, knowing you now, when you say you were arrogant, self-centered, all this stuff, I mean, I never see that in you, right? I don't see that. I don't have an inkling go, yeah, he's kind of an arrogant guy, but he's a nice guy, right? I don't see that. So it's an amazing thing how, and this is what is intriguing. And this is, this comes back to my whole argument. It's like, look, I can't prove my faith to you, but I can show the evidence of a changed life. Like you are one of those lives that changed 30 years ago, right? From how do you go from being that to what you are now? And, when I first met you, I go, this is a kind, nice guy. And I liked you right away, right? So I think it's one of those things, especially in a cynical world where we're all skeptical of each other. When you see somebody go, there's something good in this person, I see it. You didn't have to say words, I just sensed it, right? So I think that's the amazing part is so many of the stories of people who come on were a total train wreck, and now they're being kind and decent and helping people. That's what's so amazing. That's what I want people to understand who are sitting on the fence looking and go, gosh darn, are these guys nutty, or they're have an agenda? What is the deal? Why is Peter such a nice guy? Right? So people like question that when you're really decent and nice, and to say, yeah, I wasn't always like this. And then what changed to make you the way you are now?
Mm. Well, first of all, thank you. And I give credit to God, and I give credit to the love of my wife who persisted. Um, I give thanks to those people who said, Pete, there was a man who I became aware of, and I couldn't line up the image of what he says he used to be with the man I saw in front of me. I couldn't make those images line up. And so I said, would you please tell me what you did that changed you so much? Now, this man was a black Muslim. He was from South Central LA. He was in Corvallis, Oregon on a temporary work assignment. He told me, you better get your own God because mine might get you drunk. I wasn't there to talk to him about politics or theology or sociology or criminology, any of that stuff. What did you do that affected that change? And this is all within the 12-step program. And that's about all I want to say about that publicly. I'm happy to correspond with anyone or talk personally about it. So that invitation is open, and some of the best moments I've had at conferences is when I figure out that somebody else there is also part of that tribe of mine.
Mhm.
And we go off and we have a conversation in the midst of this, bigger tribe. And I'm just hours ago, someone that I met years ago sent me a message saying that they were in the hospital. And it turns out that part of the reason they're in the hospital is because of too much alcohol and an impaired liver. And part of what they started the conversation about was, they're trying to feed me toast and margarine. And, what do you think about that? And so, okay, we had the conversation, and then the rest of it came out, and it's like, well, I'm pretty sure not drinking's good for liver health. I'm not a doctor, so you want to check that, but pretty sure.
I
So
can back
things
you
like,
on that. I can back you
okay,
on that.
good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I have people doing keto diet and they're drinking a ton of alcohol at night every night. It's like, well, it's like you can't be Christian during the day and then you can't, and then go to the big party every night. And then also you can't be keto during the day and have your, beer and alcohol and cookies at night, right? Just because you're good most of the time doesn't really, you don't have a free pass on that.
Yeah. So I think that I want to invite people. Most people aren't atheists, they're agnostics. I mean, it's just like most people aren't vegans. Even vegetarians are omnivores, right? They just choose not to eat meat, which, as we've spoken about before, I'm fine with, right? You're eating animal source food, which I consider to be an essential part of every diet. I mean, I understand if people want to try veganism, but I'm pretty convinced you need more information than you probably have available to you in order to do that right. But okay, that was, but I digest, as a friend says. So this, this, my experience has been that the God of my current understanding has been waiting for everyone to make the approach. It just, and so anything along the lines of, I don't know whether you exist or not, I have my doubts, but I'd like to start with some kind of an experience. I'd like to start some kind of awareness. I mean, the amazing thing is that a being that is capable of, and so other than whatever I know, would deign to be known by me. Right? Condescend. That's an interesting word.
Mm.
Um, and and has wanted to do that all along. One of the ideas that I've gotten along the way is that God has always had a reclamation project. And the Bible speaks about that in language that I don't think is meant to be taken literally, but that's another conversation. And so this reclamation project, we now get to be a part of. We can now act in a way that points forward to whatever is coming, and language fails to describe that. And so allowing people to free themselves from the bondage of addiction and alcoholism, or the bondage of progressive, I hate to use that word, degenerative chronic illness and multiple medications with all the additional effects that those produce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I believe that human life is transcendent in the sense of it is exceptional in creation, that I do not hold, and nor do I have much tolerance for people who say that human beings and viruses, they're equal. And they exist. They exist. I just think darkness lies down that path. Um, so I think human beings have infinite worth, every single one. And anything that we can do as fellow human beings to help them achieve more of their story, their song, their act of love. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That, I think, is something that the God of my understanding would pleasure in. You get to see it when perhaps it involves overcoming infertility because we're getting rid of the insulin resistance. And suddenly parents who have been willing to go through all kinds of travail are given that gift. Well, okay. And then you can take a step back and say, where were you born?
Orlando, Florida.
Okay, Orlando, Florida. I was born in Lower Bucks County, Pennsylvania in 1956 to a mother who was 43 years old at the time. Pretty old for a woman to have a child in, I mean, even today that would be.
Yeah.
And how plot, give me the rational explanation that plots those two converging lines to wherever it was we met the first time, which I think was in San Diego.
That's right.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. If you want to believe in coincidences, that's fine. That's one way to look at them. Another way to look at them is appointments. We did have to say yes along the way. We had to go left instead of right or whatever, but there are certain things that I can live with in my life if I pay attention to them. I guess back in World War II, there were radio direction for aircraft. And so if you were right of the signal, it was a dash. And if you were left, it was a dot. And if you were in the middle on the beam, it was a steady tone. right? And that helped the pilot or navigator to then tell the pilot. What are those steady tones in our life? You know, just because something's going easy doesn't mean that that's the path we should be on. Conversely, just because we're meeting resistance doesn't mean that, you know, that is the right path. I mean, maybe it's both at times. Sometimes resistance is, you know, what I call God's spiritual 2x4 upside my head saying, yeah, Pete, you know, the joke, I've sent you the rowboat, I sent you the helicopter, you know, what did you want? So it's got to be a day in, day out. It's got to be a daily thing, because whatever it is that we're facing is likely going to be confronting us on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I think listening to that tone too, if you're not listening, you're not seeking, you don't hear it. You could be getting put on the right path, but you just don't hear it because you're not tuned in. So I find that in my life too, where I'm not tuned in. And then when God says, look, you're doing this, and I'm thinking, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. And then it's like, okay, I know who wins in that argument every time. And that's part of doing this podcast too. Because, you know, I like to fly. I'm like you. I like to fly under the radar. And the stuff you share today is very powerful. I think this will reach a lot of people. And it tells a lot about you and your motivation, because I know your motivation in your heart just from talking to you a couple times, right? So when you thought you want to do a podcast, why do you want to do it? Oh, to help people, to connect people, to do that. And that's what we're called to do, is to really be a light, and especially in these dark times. And, you know, one thing I really want to get from you, because I think you're going to have great words of wisdom. What do we tell that person right now who's had a hard year? They're struggling with anxiety and stress and alcohol and drugs and those kind of things. What do you tell that person? If you were sitting down with them right now, what would you say?
Yeah, it has been a hard year. A lot of people within my community, it was too much for them, and you know, they closed the churches, but not the liquor stores.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So if someone, it depends on where in the journey we are, right? So we have to have a conversation to learn that. If someone is thinking even for a moment that their life is not what they would like it to be, stress, is it, or am I facing problems at work, financial, within my relationships and my family, legal problems, and drugs and or alcohol are any part of that? And if you think for a moment that life might be better without that, then I would encourage you to explore life without those. And for most people who aren't not addicted, they have that moment and they can go, oh, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. But then there's a group of people like me who, for any number of reasons, say, I'm not going to do that anymore. And then I did it again and again and again. The good news is that there are lots of people who have been in similar positions, and it's their mission to help people like this hypothetical person find a way out. And they don't do it for any reward. They don't do it for any fee. They don't do it for any position. They do it because they realize that if I don't, I might not get to stay sober. Right? So you can't keep it unless you give it away, and you can't give it away if you don't got it. Right? So there are lots of resources. I would encourage people to look for hotlines. There are telephones, even today, where in many places people can't physically meet. There's stuff on Zoom, but also there's hotline numbers, and then there are resources, community health resources to help people get through. No one's so low that they can't be helped if they're willing to stop digging, right? Your bottom is when you decide to stop digging. So just release your grip on the shovel, we've got ladders, we'll come get you. You don't have to even climb out. Um, and it's a serious thing. I don't mean to minimize what people go through. I don't, there are things that I realize I have a menagerie of pet peeves. One of them is when people say, I know what you're going through. It's like, no, you don't. But I'm more than willing to tell you what it felt like when I went through mine, and other people will tell you what it was like when they went through theirs. And if you find something that rings with you, that's it. We look for the similarities, not the differences. We can find something, you know. I go to meetings, and if I'm looking for differences, I'll find them, by God. Of course I'll find them. But if I'm looking for, oh yeah, I remember what that was like, or yeah, that's what it's like now, or yeah, you know, and in a good way too. Like I remember what it feels like to wake up and there's no sense of dread hanging over my head. You know, when I don't have to feel that hard urge, you know, or when there's money at the end of the month, right? Because I haven't spent it all over here, or when I'm hiding the empties, or, you know, when I'm lying to everyone that I profess to love. And yet, so when you say what you see, I say, thank you, God, for the work that you've done. And you all, yeah, I was just talking about this last night with a group about that there's self-doubt and self-criticism is still there. And I need to hear from other people to make that, you know, like, go, go, go away. Um, so yeah, the the best message I could give someone who's struggling is the drinking and using isn't making it better. It really doesn't. It may feel like it initially, but it really doesn't, because now it's like it's just piling it up, and it's still going to be there. You know, it's the pile of manure is still going to be in the living room. The only way for that to, and there's no pony. There's no pony anywhere here. So stop reaching for the answer from a substance. And as we know, that could be food. We know that
Yeah.
could be irresponsible spending. That can
Pornography,
be
shopping, yeah, all that stuff.
lots of ways. And the only way that I can face the uncertain times is with the understanding that I may, you know, in the end, it's going to be okay. And if it's not okay, it's just not the end yet. And I get that from my faith. Other people have different, and I'm not saying anything about the differences, but that's what I get from mine. And so I may not know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future is another version of that. And then I can also read back into our traditions and read the personal experiences of people there who faced far greater than I probably will ever face in my life. And so that can help me as well, because I have these models to follow as poorly as I can, not to equate myself with any of the saints, but you get the idea. So I would, again, there are resources locally. Please reach out if that describes you. If it doesn't, you know, kick it under the chair and leave it. You know, don't pay it any mind at all. If you want to reach out to me, you'll have contact information. I'm not hard to find. You know, I'll do it off the side. I'm not going to do it in the publicly viewable spaces. Although, when it comes to an anniversary time, I usually post a coin. It's like, oh, look, I got another one. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Three
man, I'm
X's
proud of
this
you.
year.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome, man. That is awesome, especially this year. And even Elton John, I just saw he posted something that said if it weren't for Zoom meetings for me to be connected, I'd be off the rails right now. And he
Mm.
and so it doesn't matter how much money you have, how much power you have, all those things. It's a struggle for a lot of people. So it's such an honor to have you on. And if people want to talk to you and reach out, I know obviously your podcast, you can talk about your podcast and what you're doing elsewhere for people who are interested in what you have to say.
Thank you. Well, so along the way, I had my personal health journey that began, 13 years ago, where basically I reversed prediabetes as a result of a therapeutic carbohydrate reduction type diet. And so at some point then I started going to these conferences. I met all these people and I started to realize a lot of these people don't know what I know about animal source food production, especially ruminant animal source food. So then I started talking about that, writing about it. That led to the people who listened to me then became the ruminati. These are people that begin to understand why ruminant animal agriculture is essential and the fundamental role that ruminant animal products play in human health and flourishing. I was given the title of Don Pedro, the sod father of the ruminati. So I started beginning of last month, still I could say that, in November, the Meet Your Herd Mates Sodcast. And I've been very honored to have on as guests luminaries like Dr. Eads and Dr. Wortman and Dr. Fetke and Dr. Lenskis, and then people from the ag producer side, Danny Beer from northern South Dakota, who's a third generation cattlewoman, a meat scientist from North Dakota State University, and now I've got many more in queue. So I'm trying to just introduce people to the ruminati from across the spectrum. In terms of contacting me, peter.ballerstedt@gmail.com is an email that people can use to reach out. And as I say, I'm all over social media, grass-based on Twitter and Instagram. Grass-based Health is a blog. You can find a Facebook page called that as well.
Peter, it's an honor. Thank you so much, Doctor. I should say, Dr.
Oh,
Ballerstedt. I
doctor,
appreciate it. Yeah,
doctor.
yeah, Doctor. But your funny jokes on Twitter, lift my spirits. Dumb jokes, and we're the only two who get it probably. But really, your story is powerful. I think just knowing your struggles with alcohol and being public about that. That's we don't like to talk about our demons sometimes, but and then realizing it's a lifelong battle. Same thing with low carb with me, and all those kind of things. So I think one of the really important take home for me is when you're saying, look, having to hide the bottle, having to, so many people just can't share what they're struggling with, and you can't get help until you could share your struggles. And I think one of my patients just got out of rehab, and she said, I was so ashamed to talk to you. And I was like, and she goes, you were so kind and decent about it. You didn't judge me. I was like, well, heck, you just went through it. I mean, my goodness, what are you going to do? And it's a struggle. And now you're free of that chain of that not the chain of addiction, but the chain of living in shame, like hiding bottles from her husband and all those things. And so, I think it is important. And the other thing that I just wanted to give a shout out to Lisa, we've interacted on Twitter, and she was very kind, and she's agnostic. And she said, just hearing the stories made me think about me falling away from the church and what's important in life. And I'm really listening and dialed in. And because I find on Twitter what happens is atheists want to argue with me about my faith, and I'm not interested in arguing with you. It's like, hey, let me present my case, and you weigh the evidence and look at your own life and see what's important. And I think having you on is very important for people to say, gosh, like you're saying, that God meant nothing, and then all of a sudden, boom, you have this life change, and now you're sober for 30 years. And how many people, if they bow their knee a little bit and humble themselves, what can happen? And that's what's amazing when you see it play out in a life, and that's what I want to impress people with.
There was a specific moment in a residential center where, so very early, where I gave up cigarette smoking the same day. Is, you know, it all stopped the same time. So it was an interesting experience. But at this, they were at this institution, they were on a no caffeine phase of their program. So you could smoke your brains out, cigarettes, but no caffeine. That's interesting. So at 5 something in the morning, I'm walking across the common area for my first cup of decaf coffee, which is how bad I was. Why bother? I don't. And as I'm walking along here on this chair, on the arm of a chair, is a flip top box of Camel filters, closed, sitting there. And that had been my brand. And so the one side of my brain says something to me about, you know, you should check to see if there's any in there. And like, you know, you're going to be a good guy and police the litter or something, you know, like throw away the empty pack, right? The other side of my brain says, just called BS, and said, why would you do that, right? Mm-hmm. The first side of my brain spoke up again, realized it had been busted, and just cut right to the chase. Now, if nobody else can understand or relate to the voices, don't worry, it's okay. As long as they're not talking about guns or anything like that. And so the first side of my brain just said, well, no one will know. I mean, this was clear in my mind. And this side said, no, I'll know and God will know. And whether God would know or not had never been important before. And I just merely tell you that it was good enough then, and it has been good ever since. Enough so far today, 10,777 days later. Wow. And ultimately, if someone doesn't believe, then no explanation is sufficient. But to someone who does, no explanation is necessary.
That is life's best medicine right there. That is so true. That's exactly how I ended it with that person, because they go, prove this, prove that. And I can't prove it. It just is what it is at some point.
History is the study of the irreproducible.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's amazing. And so thank you for your wisdom, and bless you. And I so enjoyed this time. I know I would anyways, but thank you for opening the curtain and letting us in and sharing your life and your wisdom, because this will help people. What you've gone through, there's a reason for that. And you have a gift to help people, and a kindness and a decency, and you're a connector of people. That's kind of how I view. We're pretty similar in a lot of ways, and that's kind of cool. So, hey everyone, this is Life's Best Medicine. You've heard it just now, and thank you for listening. Thank you for your support, and thank you for just giving us an hour of your time, of your life, and hopefully this continues to be of value to you, because I know it is to me. Have a blessed week, and be kind to yourself and be kind to others.
Bye, everyone. Be well.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.